Hello everybody, Dan and I are here today in the little town of Battle near Hastings. Of course, this area was famous for the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest in 1066. William the Conqueror, of course, subsequently became king. So let's take a walk around this lovely little place and see what we can see. We're at Battle Abbey, which is an English heritage site, and we're in the cafe. There's this wall of history that shows you the whole timeline how things developed from the battle right through to more modern times. Here, for example, it says the work of Mary Wollstonecraft, 1759 to 1797, marks a milestone in the history of feminism. And you will recall that we met Mary Wollstonecraft and her daughter Mary Shelley when I did the Ramsgate Artists Quarter recently. She and her works were pivotal in the birth of feminism, and as such she is noted on this panel. We've got right through to the 20th century. Here in the 11th century, it says in 1085 William the Conqueror, who was King of England by this time, recorded this. The Domesday Book was commissioned in 1085 by William the Conqueror, who was King of England, as a record of all his possessions. It's the oldest survey in England containing details of over 13,000 settlements. Here is an excerpt from the Domesday Book, and the recording started in 1086. And many years ago, with my ex-partner, we went to see a property in Derbyshire that was from at least as far back as 1086. It was this beautiful, massive manor house, and we were looking to rent a third of it, but in the end we didn't. It was big and sprawling, really too big for our needs. It's the year 1066, and we see all around the walls the events that transpired during this monumental time. And William the Conqueror was a good king, and he brought in many changes that were beneficial to the people of England. And he brought the people together, because when the Anglo-Saxons were ruling, every area of England was divided into a different kingdom. So there was a king for each area, and there was a lot of fragmentation, and there was a great dichotomy between the kingdoms and divisiveness, and William just brought everything together, and he was really the forefather of the modern day system in England, and of course later Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. King Harold didn't last long, because he only had his coronation in 1066, so he lasted hardly any time at all, because the same year was the Norman Conquest. He was killed off, ostensibly.
It's January, and some bad news has just reached the court of William, Duke of Normandy.
He was the last king of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom.
A report was brought to Normandy.
The battle axes used by the English were versatile weapons, and in skilled hands could inflict terrible wounds. The length of the shaft increased the force of the blow.
While all the people were one,
you wouldn't stand a chance. The English sword was a weapon of the wealthy. Its long broad blade is shaped for cutting rather than stabbing. And there's the English shield. It's made out of wood, and its outer face is covered in leather. The English stood shoulder to shoulder to create a shield wall. It must have been very frightening, and the wealthy men on each side would have worn something like this. The most expensive helmets were beaten out of single sheets of metal. Others could be made of several pieces riveted together. And there's the bow that was used during the fighting. But it was the Norman use of masked archers to break the English line that proved decisive in the battle. They were amazing strategists. The Normans were always very fierce, and that's why they liked the Scots. Some of my ancestors were warlords, the Douglases, and they were very fierce. And a lot of the Scottish warlords were looked upon as beneficial warriors in an alliance with the Normans and the French.
Harold's men quickly marched south to confront the Lords.
We saw some old pennies yesterday, didn't we? One of the antique shops in Hastings from Henry III and Edward I.
Yes, they were quite old.
The second and Richard III.
7,000 strong.
Do you remember?
Yes, I remember seeing
They
those.
weren't in Bandic, were
No, they
they?
weren't.
They were in the ballpark figure of £120
Yeah, silver
each.
pennies.
Certain that right is on his side. At last the night is past.
It tells you that Normandy was a very young political creation in 1066, and in some ways the likely birthplace for a claimant to the
He
English
placed foot
throne.
soldiers in front.
Chosen his position on a hill north of Hastings.
Isn't that
His
beautiful?
battle
That was the
formation is
charter
very
of
different
Robert
from
I, Duke of
William's,
Normandy,
because all the
in the
English
early
are
11th century.
Also, many of the men are already exhausted.
The charter
after
was
2
destroyed in
forced marches
1944
and
during the
major
Allied
battle.
invasion of
The
Normandy.
English
It was
had
drawn up
defences
before
together, forming a
1035.
shield wall and wait.
The monastery of Mont Saint-Michel, the real Mont Saint-Michel, not one in Cornwall, a sacramentary of Mont Saint-Michel, 1040s, beautiful.
The English, for their part, resisted bravely.
The Abbey
Each one by
Church
any means he could devise.
St. Etienne.
They
Yes,
threw
Town,
javelins and missiles of various kinds, murderous axes, and stones tied to
This is
sticks.
one of two churches found
The
by
Normans
William the
failed
Conqueror and his wife
to force
Matilda
attack with the
in
English
Caen
shield
in
wall.
fulfilment of a penance probably imposed in
Others
1059.
said William
This is the
had
Norman sword. For the Normans, the sword was not only a weapon of war, but also a symbol of authority and knighthood.
and for the past 6 hours, the
And
English
while the sword was a type of spear use on horseback, it could be thrown or catched under the arm. The combined weight and speed of horse and rider made the catched lance a terrible weapon of attack. And in fact, you need tremendous upper body strength to hold that and ride your horse and stay on the horse without falling off the horse. And that Norman shield made it suitable for use on horseback. It's a kind of pear shape. The straps on the back allowed it to be hung over the neck and to be carried in various ways. So it was more versatile than the English shield.
That's probably why the English lost.
Probably. They were very tactical, the French.
So this is the family room that they use at Battle Abbey for kids to play with. Having a quick wander around the courtyard. Very quick wander. We're going to be going on a tour very soon. Very old graffiti here. 1901. graffiti over this side as well.
John Dalton, he's got a double velvet. Peter Dalton.
Probably brothers.
And then is GHW, whoever that was. MF. Our tour guide was a specialist in Anglo-Saxon history. He explained how Edward the Confessor, who built the Houses of Parliament and was successful in being buried there, which is what he wanted, died without an heir. After his death, the barons got together and decided that the new king should be Harold Godwinson. And once that had been agreed, Harold Godwinson was crowned within a week. So this King Harold was a Saxon, and everyone in Sussex was quite pleased about that. A Sussex king, a Saxon king. His main country house was down in nearby Bosham, and close to the beautiful church there was his country home. It was his area, so it was a very important part of the whole story. At the time of King Harold, Sussex was heavily forested. It was a difficult and almost impenetrable place. You might imagine that the battlefield was open rolling plains, but in fact it wasn't. It was heavily forested. So this is the kind of terrain the armies would have had to come through. And it was also very boggy. The clay soil doesn't drain very well either, so you can imagine what it was like. So why was the battle here? Because it's not the most logical place if you're going to have a battle. Can you imagine what it would have been like with hundreds and even thousands of soldiers getting through the heavily wooded and boggy terrain? Wagons, carts, horses, and all sorts of things to transport. In most parts, the tracks would have also been really narrow, and there were no main roads down here at all. We're now talking about mid-spring, early summer, 1066. However, even though Harold was king, there were two others who thought they had a right to the throne. One of them was a Viking called Harold Hardrada, and the other William, Duke of Normandy. Harold Hardrada did actually have a claim to the throne because in times previous there had been Viking kings in England. So he had a legitimate claim to the throne. So he thought that he should be king, especially being a Viking. England was a very attractive place to be because it had a lot of land and a lot of wealth. So Harold Hardrada started to assemble a fleet. So King Harold was getting ready, but he wasn't getting ready too hard for Harold Hardrada, because there was William, Duke of Normandy out there as well. So we're looking at about 50 miles as the crow flies, and Normandy was really well run. And William was the Duke, and he believed that he also had a claim due to some misunderstanding, because he and King Harold had been friends and there was some kind of discussion that got lost in interpretation. So in this way, the firm friendship started to break down. Normandy means land of the Norsemen because originally it was invaded by Vikings. So there's a connection between Vikings and Hardrada, but the Vikings had expanded out and some of them had arrived in Normandy. So there's a connection between Normandy and Vikings also. They settled over there and formed the area as we know it now. Now, William was the son of the previous Duke, Robert the Magnificent. However, he was Robert's illegitimate son, so he grew up fighting, fleeing and staying alive, because the barons weren't that keen on him becoming Robert's successor. However, his father Robert enrolled all the barons into having William as his heir. So he was legitimate in the sense that they'd all agreed to that. But many of them really felt that he was too young and he wasn't really of royal stock. So William had a pretty tough upbringing. But he survived and he became the Duke of Normandy, and he became very well known as a fighter. He also married a wonderful woman called Matilda, who not only was fully supportive of him, but was very good at running the country when he was away fighting. And they stayed loyal to each other throughout their lives together. So when Edward the Confessor passed away, William was furious that Harold had become king because of the agreement made on some holy relics, when Harold had promised to support William, because everything was in French, so Harold had just gone along nodding and agreeing. Our guide then took us to the place where the battle is reenacted every year, although where the battle actually did take place is much further out. The reason for this is that they need a big space and it looks just right for a battle. And although it looks nice and open, in reality it really wasn't like that at all. If you look over to the other side of the hill with the forest area, it was all like that when Harold was king. And this was where the Normans decided they were going to have the battle. The Normans couldn't get across, but the Saxons were here on the hill waiting for them. At one point, the Saxons thought that the Normans would amass at the Isle of Wight and go across to Portsmouth and then go up to London, because there was a good road that the Romans had built that would take them directly there. And this argument made a lot of sense. And while all this was going on, Hardrada could see there was an opportunity for himself. The spies got back to him and said there's a load of Saxons down south. So the Vikings decided that they were going to invade from the north part of the country and come towards York. So that's what they did. So they did that while the army was down here. Tosvig, Harold's brother, had joined them. That sounds like a very Viking name, and although Harold Godwinson was Saxon, he was also related to the Vikings. So the Vikings landed and attacked York very successfully. However, afterwards, the Vikings made one big mistake. Tosvig said, it's going to take the army at least 10 days to march to York. We've got plenty of time. So the Vikings, who were very good at fighting, were also very good at partying. And they celebrated. They had a great big party after the success of York, and Harold knew they were there, and he knew there could be a problem. So Harold told his army it would take us 10 days to get there, but if we march through the night, we'll do it in 5, and we'll give them a surprise. And so the Viking army marched through the day and through the night. And thus there was the Battle of Stamford Bridge. and the Vikings were routed there. It was a massive victory for the Saxons, and the Vikings had to retreat and escape back to their boats. Even worse though, when they set out to sea, there was a terrible storm and their fleet was destroyed on their way back home, and thus the Vikings suffered huge losses, which they didn't really recover from for a long time. And even better news for Harold, Tosvig was no longer with us. So it all worked out very well. However, although that had worked out well, it was now later in September and the Normans landed. They got into their boats, the weather cleared and they just sailed across. And they landed at Pevensey. At that time, Pevensey was on the sea. It was a Roman port, and they'd landed there. There was very little resistance. There weren't many soldiers there, and it was a very easy victory. And then they came along the coast all the way down to Hastings. And that's why the story goes it's the Battle of Hastings, because Hastings was the nearest settlement to here. There was no such place as Battle. The name came afterwards. We then walked past the Elizabeth Tower. The Elizabeth Tower was named after Queen Elizabeth I. It was built for her because Henry VIII, her father, thought she might want to come and live here. She never came because her circumstances changed, but the tower has retained the name. William had been fighting since he was 18 and he was 38 when he landed in Hastings. So he'd been fighting for 20 years. Now, his wife Matilda, who was a fabulous support to him and of course was a duchess, decided that she'd quite like to be the queen. So anyway, William got his scouts to have a look around the area and decided that he would come here to fight. It was just the spot. So the area beyond the trees is the actual battlefield itself. By now it was October, a bit foggy and there was lots of trees. There was some marsh area as well, so it was a bit boggy. So this area is actually very realistic. The Norman army was there. They'd been down there for a couple of days and they were a well-organised fighting machine. And they thought, if we win, we'll get a piece of England. So why did the scouts choose the very bottom of a hill as their spot rather than the higher ground, which is what the Saxons had chosen? Wouldn't they be at a disadvantage? William had hundreds of horsemen, but the Saxons didn't have many. The Norman army was really formidable. There were 3 groups of Norman archers. There was the short bow, the long bow, and the crossbow. The Saxons also had archers, mostly long bow, not so much short bow. In fact, most of the archers were men whose bows and arrows were there to kill deer and other animals for food, so they were in no way designed for warfare. Both sides had infantrymen. The cavalry were the pièce de résistance of the Norman fighting. The Normans had 300 or 400 of these men, all on horseback. If you can imagine on the day with hundreds of them coming towards you, the sound must have been deafening. And most of the time when you see films, the horses look quite pretty, but the real war horses were rugged, not at all like you might see in the films. Those kinds of horses were usually used for parade when the deed had been done, rather than on the battlefield itself. The horses used in battle were sturdy and fierce and were a weapon themselves. It was hard work getting up the hill for the infantrymen and the bowmen. The horses were kept on the flanks. The left-hand flank wasn't quite so useful because it was marshy over there. The right-hand flank is the one the cavalry were going to use. The Saxons arrived at Calbeck Hill and they were there the night beforehand. The Normans had assembled around 7,000 to 8,000 soldiers down in the valley. At this time, it was quite a large number of soldiers, although by today's standards, it certainly wasn't. When battles took place, they usually lasted about 2 to 3 hours because it was really hard work. They were carrying swords and shields, and they were wearing heavy armour, so battles didn't usually take that long. However, this battle took between 10 and 12 bloody hours. It went on and on. And a terrible loss of life happened here. From the high ground, the Saxons had a particular military strategy, which was to hold the line. This was done with a wall of shields. The shields were interlocked, and every time the Norman army advanced, they locked their shields, the spears came through, and it was very difficult to penetrate. And the Normans had a lot of problems getting up the hill, and every time they got up, they were repelled. Behind the shield wall was the house guard with Harold, the really well-drilled, well-dressed soldiers with the horses and the swords and all the paraphernalia. Now, swords were not the preferred weapon of Saxons. They much preferred the axe, especially the double-headed axe, and they were particularly skilled at using that, although they did have swords and daggers. And as a lot of them came from farming stock, they were far more likely to have an axe than a sword. And the Saxons did have archers, but there weren't as many as the Normans had. So lots of arrows were going that way, but not so many were coming back. And therefore, this was kind of futile. Because there weren't as many archers coming back, this method of warfare for the Normans wasn't as effective as it usually was. The outcome of the battle was perhaps a little stroke of luck for the Normans. On the left-hand flank, the Bretons started to flee because at one point William had come off his horse and he was on the ground. So they thought that William was a goner and they scarpered. So in effect the army was split, and this is where the Saxons made their faux pas. They saw the Bretons running away. They thought, there goes some money, there goes the latest weapon, and they went chasing after them. And this meant that that shield wall was broken and Harold was exposed. William had seen what was happening and got another horse, He got behind the Bretons, who saw he was alive, and he regrouped them. However, he'd seen a weakness and he was able to get at Harold.
Is that something from a different battle though? Air raid shelter.
Yeah,
And you've been here before, have you?
years and years and years ago.
Same here, years and years and years ago. I think when I was about 11.
Oh, yeah.
Came here.
It is a place you could come again.
We walked
Oh, yeah.
to the Harold Stone, which marks the spot where Harold is said to have fallen. And there's also a special memorial stone where the soldiers fell. After the battle, William built the abbey in penance for all the bloodshed that had been spilled. As for the bones of all those who fell, there was nothing found much after the battle, not even the weapons. Our guide told us that the Duchess of Cleveland was the one who saw the huge potential in the site and did a lot of the renovations here. She recognised its historical importance and that it should be celebrated and looked after. So she did the Victorian garden and she did the walk as well, which is a path that goes along the site. But she also was the first person to produce a guidebook for the place. All in all, it was a fabulous and highly informative guided tour. We really enjoyed it.
Tuning pegs.
Urinal and mercury jar.
Yeah, it's just the right size.
It's based on fragments from the abbey.
Rosary beads. And a shield and all. I think it's nice, isn't it?
Here in the abbey, the monks ate together in the refectory. Their diet consisted largely of a thick vegetable soup, coarse bread and beer, and of course the thick vegetable soup was known as pottage.
Such as peace pottage services.
Yes. Or potage, darling. Something with oats in, perhaps.
Pottage.
Or barley. Gosh, they weren't allowed to eat meat until the late 14th century.
Right, we're just going up to the top of the tower now. Let's see what's up here.
Here you are. Look, for a second now. Look. Come here, look. Look. Look, right here, there. Right here.
Let's see what's up here. Sandstone. well-worn sandstone. I do have a carrier bag in my hand, that's what that scraping sound is. So here we are on our way up to the top. There's the car park.
So just up there is where you did the what's it called? The pottery painting. That's just in one of those shops there, isn't it? Can you see it on the shop?
There's the town centre.
So when we went for our
Well, it's a good view from up here. And there's the school and the Elizabeth Tower, named after Elizabeth I. And Anthony Brown, Henry VIII's best mate, who was asked to marry Anne of Cleves.
You can see our car now.
So there you are.
Ours is the silver car.
At least the weather's dry today. It's stopped raining, it's a little bit cold, but nothing a good hot cup of tea won't fix. So I'll head back down again. Mind your head. Ooh!
The garden. By the stands of the day, this latrine offered a very high degree of privacy and comfort. It was used by the occupant of the adjoining room, probably a senior monastic official or important guest. Waste from the latrine dropped into a pit which can be seen outside. Battle had no convenient water supply, meaning that this and the Abbey's other latrine pits had to be cleaned out by hand.
And that would have been my job.
And probably were a bit whiffy at times, especially if they had the stomach ache from changing to a diet that included meat and the tummies weren't used to it. And here we are now having a little bit of lunch in the cafe. We have leek and potato soup on the menu with lovely fresh baked sourdough bread and green tea for two. Tuck in. I can smell wood smoke.
Smells nice.
Somebody's got a fireplace.
So we've had a wander around the Battle Abbey. It's
Yes.
very enjoyable. We had a really nice guided tour by a guy called Graham, one of the volunteers on site, and learned quite a lot about the Battle of
It was
Hastings.
excellent.
And now we're going to look around Battle itself.
I'm going to have a look in the antique shop here.
And I'll come and join you. There's some lovely buildings here. This one dates from 1500. Probably haunted, wouldn't be surprised.
Trombone.
No, it's some kind of, I don't know, it's not a trombone, it's something else that
Tuba.
No, tuba's bigger.
Ladies' court. I'm an old lady and this is my court.
And I'm an old putter. Have a little wander around here.
This, you can get your beard trimmed.
Yeah.
Dog grooming.
And the dog can get his beard trimmed.
Battle Beauty.
It's a bit sleepy around here.
It is a bit sleepy, isn't it? Lucky's Cafe. That's a dog's cafe.
Yeah.
That's shut.
Yeah, it's not very lucky.
But you don't get to pet dogs. It's from this year as well. It's
Yes,
just
it's
a new
new.
one. Good prices. They compare with the hotel where we're staying,
Yes,
which is very reasonable. Smoked salmon and avo. That's nice. There's a branch of cook, so you can get all the ingredients you want to make your fish pie or whatever.
Yeah.
It's all frozen usually. You just put it in the oven. It's posh ready meals basically. We've got quite a few statues of deities in this little town. We saw Ganesh and a Buddha in another shop further down the road.
King's Head Pub. Another all old buildings here. A gallery. Antique shop. Oh. Probably Harold.
Yeah.
Well, I could be wrong. Knowing my track record, it's not who I'd say it is.
I've never seen a picture of William. William was a warrior. The houses are nice with the shutters.
Yeah, lovely.
Custom painted shoes. I thought it said pointed shoes actually. There are quite a lot of pagans down this part of the world.
Yeah.
We've met quite a few, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. Nice people.
Lovely. Coffee, eco refill and lovely things. Home store. Shall we have a look around there?
I'll have a look there.
It might not be.
There's the main town car park. We're parked in the Abbey car park.
Weatherboarding.
Yeah. It's quite popular around here, isn't it?
Yes.
You get some buildings in New England a bit like that, don't
Yes. As I've said before, in my Ramsgate Historic Quarter and Ramsgate Artist Quarter vlogs, weatherboarding is very popular in East Sussex where we are and Kent. And there's some good examples, and these are older properties. They've been around a long time, these styles. And this one is cladding with tiles.
Yeah.
Again, it's quite typical of this area. So that's the end of our little wander around Battle. It's a Sunday, so quite a lot of the shops are shut. What we've seen though has been brilliant. There's even an Indian restaurant just across the road.
It's called Battle of India.
So if you're in the area, it's well worth coming here. The Battle Abbey is a brilliant thing to see and will keep you occupied for 2 or 3 hours at least, and the cafe is super yummy. So thank you for joining us on our wander around. Please like, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't already done so, ding the notification bell and all that good stuff, and we'll see you again soon for the next one. Until then, bye for now.
Bye.